top investor, BRICS is going to need an XRP bridge. All right. So the question is, could a fragmented global economy accidentally trigger the biggest XRP utility wave in history? Now, imagine building the most advanced high-speed railway inside your own country, completely isolated from your neighbors, only to realize your passengers still need to travel across the border to buy their goods. That is exactly the multi-trillion-dollar dilemma facing emerging economies today. As the BRICS nation move aggressively to construct an entire new alternative financial architecture, the loudest voices in the room are focused strictly on cutting ties with Western payment networks. But a massive gaping hole has just been exposed in this strategy. Now, a prominent analyst right here, digital asset investor, recently shared a groundbreaking post on X that shifts the entire conversation. The core message is clear. BRICS is going to need an XRP bridge. So as a market observer, I see this not as a speculative guess, but as an absolute structural reality. So in this video, we are breaking down why an isolated financial bloc cannot survive on its own, how the push for financial sovereignty actually forces the need for a neutral intermediary, and why XRP fits this puzzle perfectly. So let's start with our very first question about why is an independent messaging system not enough for global trade? The narrative surrounding alternative financial infrastructure has taken concrete shape. Member nations are actively rolling out plans for their own independent payment settlement systems, regional grain exchanges, standalone investment platforms, and dedicated reinsurance entities. The speaker in this video shared by the analyst rightly pointed out that Western institutions have historically held a monopoly over these sectors. By building these alternatives, the bloc intends to operate completely outside traditional Western gatekeepers. The stated goal is to conduct international trade using local national currencies instead of relying on the US dollar or the euro. This movement is specifically designed to safeguard these economies from arbitrary asset freezes or external sanctions, ensuring long-term sovereign stability. Now, here comes my opinion. It is highly admirable that these nations want to break away from what they view as a weaponized Western financial system. However, as a market observer, my perspective is that setting up a standalone messaging system, essentially an alternative to SWIFT, is the only half the battle. You can create the most successful communication line in the world, but if the central banks on either end do not share a common liquid asset to settle the value instantly, you have just replaced an old administrative bottleneck with a new technological one. Trading in dozens of highly volatile local currencies introduces massive foreign exchange risk. Without a central friction remover, this independent infrastructure risk becoming an expensive, isolated network. Now, how does the interoperability trap force the need for a bridge currency? This brings us directly to the core problem exposed by a digital asset investor. In the footage shared on X, the analyst poses a critical question for all market observers to digest. Even if this massive economic bloc successfully deploys an independent financial network, how do they plan to interact with the rest of the world? The undeniable reality is that these nations cannot trade in a complete vacuum. They must still execute massive commercial transactions with countries outside their alliance, including the United States and the European Union. Because total economic isolation is mathematically impossible for global superpowers, the analyst highlights that these nations will fundamentally require a bridge currency of some sort to link their systems back to the external markets. Now, here's my opinion. This is where the retail crowd completely misses the point, and it's why the analyst breakdown is so brilliant. Everyone is looking for a winner-take-all scenario where the US dollar either rules supreme or completely collapses. But as a market observer, I know the real world is messy and hyper-fragmented. If Brazil wants to trade with a non-aligned nation, or if India needs to settle an immediate account with a Western corporation without using the US dollar, they encounter an interoperability trap. They cannot force the outside world to hold their local fiat tokens, and they refuse to hold Western fiat tokens. This gridlock is exactly what forces the hands of international central banks to search out a digital asset that carries zero political baggage. Now, why does XRP fit the description of a politically neutral intermediary? When you analyze the evolving payment landscape described in the update, Digital Asset Investor summarized the situation perfectly by stating that someone is going to need a neutral bridge asset. Alright? While the video segment left the conclusion open, the analyst's explicit commentary on X made it undeniable that XRP is the primary candidate to fill this exact operational void. The view leverages a deep, systematic architectural feature of the digital asset: its innate ability to act as a neutral intermediary capable of facilitating ultra-efficient value transfers between entirely separate currency pairs and distinct payment networks without requiring mutual trust between the participants. Now, here's my opinion. Let's look at this strictly through the lens of a market observer. XRP was literally engineered from day one to serve as an abstract liquidity instrument. It does not belong to the Federal Reserve, and it does not belong to any Eastern central bank. In a highly polarized world where trust between nations has hit an all-time low, a neutral open-source ledger like the XRP ledger becomes the ultimate diplomatic middle ground. Neither side has to yield sovereignty to the other. They simply use the tokenized protocol for a fraction of a second to swap value A into value B. It is an elegant, math-based resolution to a geopolitical deadlock. Now, can real-world trade interoperability supersede ideological alliances? What makes this specific analysis highly unique is that it steers completely clear of the typical hype narratives. The analyst is not claiming that these emerging nations are going to completely replace their existing systems with Ripple technology or adopt XRP as their native sovereign currency. Instead, the focus remains entirely on the practical, unyielding demands of international logistics and cross-border trade. The core thesis is that a different economic regions establish separate, independent financial walls. Global commerce will still demand a frictionless settlement layer to connect those walls. The ongoing necessity for multi-currency liquidity means that an open protocol is required to link these distinct networks seamlessly. Now, here's my opinion. I am thoroughly exhausted by the sensationalist claims that a specific bloc of nations is going to suddenly adopt a single digital asset to back their entire economy. The reality, as I see it, is far more practical. Nations care about survival and profit margins. If utilizing an open source ledger reduces the cost of settlement from days to seconds and eliminates the need to hold massive pre-funded accounts in foreign banks, they will deploy it purely out of economic necessity. Interoperability isn't about ideology. It's about engineering the path of least resistance for capital. And finally, here's our overall conclusion. The takeaway from this macro analysis is profound. The global financial architecture is visibly fragmenting into a distinct regional networks, each seeking sovereignty and independence from traditional legacy structures. However, true independence cannot exist without connection. As highlighted by the analyst on X, the more these independent financial infrastructures develop, the more acute the need becomes for a neutral, non-political bridge asset to facilitate trade between conflicting economic zones. XRP stands as the most mature, liquid, and functionally viable protocol capable of preventing global trade from locking up entirely. The future of finance may not be unified under one superpower, but it will undoubtedly have to be bridged by neutral technology. Alright, and this finally ends our video. Thank you very much for watching and see you on the next one, or you might just as well check this next recommended video right here.